In every society, people experience disputes all the time, but fail to resolve as often as they do cooperate. Many scholars argue that some systems of dispute resolution lead to consistently inefficient outcomes by reinforcing behaviors that are not in the best interest of the disputants involved. In this module, we will look at 3 typical ways of resolving disputes and the relationship among them. Then we try to identify what is more efficient way of resolving dispute based on key criteria. First approach is called power-based approach. Second approach is rights-based approach. Third one is called interest-based approach. From the next slide, we will discuss each approach one by one. Among the 3 approaches, power-based approach is the way to resolve a dispute by determining who is more powerful or who has more resources. Power is the ability to force people to do something they would not otherwise do. In public disputes, we can often observe power struggle such as strikes, protest, demonstration, and preemptive suppression by the government. Also, negotiations can belong to power-based approach when negotiators exchange threats and bluffing. Disputants decide to exercise their power in order to force other parties to do what they want by imposing costs on the other side or threaten to do so. People often use rights-based approach to resolve a dispute by assessing who is right or by focusing primarily on law, policies, or contract. They rely on rights or standards as sources of legitimacy to their claims. Common rights-based approach is going to the court, where a judge as the third party hands down a binding decision. Some negotiations also focus on determining who is right when lawyers as negotiators argue about whose case has greater merit. The third approach to resolve a dispute is interest-based approach. Interests are the needs, desires, concerns, and fears that underlie people's apparent positions and claims. This approach intends to identify the actual interests of the disputant and search for a solution to satisfy those interests by devising creative options and making trade-offs among different interests. Parties in this approach frame other parties as partners to work together to solve their own problems. Common procedures for reconciling interests are negotiation and mediation. Let us now look at the relations among 3 approaches by examining the following diagram. The concepts of interest, rights, and power are interlinked to each other. Their relationship can be described by 3 different sized circles that include one another. The innermost circle represents interest. The reconciliation of interests happens within the context of the disputant rights and power. The determination of rights takes place within the context of power. For example, the likely outcome from a negotiation can be affected by the likely outcome of a dispute if taken to court or to a protest. The issue is where we start focusing among 3 circles in the process of resolving a dispute. The focus may shift from power to rights to interest, or from interest, rights to power. How do we know which approach is better than other approaches? 3 different approaches to resolve a dispute all involve cost and benefits. Cost may include the time, money, emotional energy, and the resources consumed and the opportunities lost. Benefits may include satisfaction with outcomes, effect on the relationships, and stability of the outcome. Now we can compare 3 approaches in terms of such cost and benefits. Let's compare 3 approaches in terms of transaction cost. First, a power-based approach always induces a power contest where the parties compete with actions to determine who will prevail. A power contest typically cost much more in resources consumed and opportunities lost than a rights-based approach and interest-based approach. Strikes and violence often create casualties and cost more than arbitration and litigation. Reconciling interests usually costs less than determining who is right or more powerful because people can uncover important but hidden issues underlying the dispute more effectively by focusing on interest. Considering the expense of litigation, such as hiring lawyers and long years to get a court decision, interest-based negotiation is generally less expensive than a litigation. In terms of satisfaction with the outcome, interest-based approach, such as negotiation and mediation, helps to make parties more satisfied with the solutions that have been mutually agreed upon than the solutions that are imposed by a third-party decision-maker or were forced to adapt by powerful parties. That is because interest-based negotiation can help parties to identify the issues that are most important to each side and to make them trade off issues of lesser concern for those of great concern. Also, interest-based negotiation or mediation can cover procedural and psychological issues that are not necessarily considered in legal judgment. Three approaches also make different effects on relationship among the disputants. First, both right and power approaches can strain the relationship. In a power contest, damage the relationship more than the right contest because destroying the opposition may be the very object of a power contest. Power contests often create new disputes along with anger, trust, and a desire for revenge. Also, when a right-based approach, such as litigation, typically produces a winner and a loser, relationships are likely to be more adversarial. Such interactions tend to reinforce already rigid positions and negative perceptions of the other side, such as enemy. However, an interest-based negotiation or mediation emphasizes and preserves collaborative relationship among the parties to solve the problems together as partners rather than enemies. Finally, the stability of the outcomes from dispute resolution hinges upon compliance of the parties with the terms, ability of the parties to implement the outcomes, and to resolve a potential dispute in the future. If disputants can reach their own workable agreements through negotiation or mediation, they are more likely to comply with its terms and implement them voluntarily. Also, if a potential dispute related to the current outcomes occur, the parties in good relationship are more likely to resolve the dispute in amicable ways. Therefore, all things considered, interest-based approaches can lead to higher level of stability of the outcomes than rights-based approaches and power-based approaches that are more likely to produce unsatisfactory outcomes and adversarial relationships. To sum up our comparison of three approaches with four criteria, interest-based approaches, in general, are less costly and more beneficial in terms of satisfaction, relationship, and stability than rights-based approaches and power-based approaches. Also, rights-based approaches are less costly and more beneficial than power-based approaches. Focusing on objective standards is often less costly than getting caught up in a threat and a counter-threat. However, there are situations or cases when rights-based approaches and power-based approaches are necessary. Also, sometimes focusing on rights or power can achieve what interest-based approaches cannot. For example, when people believe they can get what they want by going to the court or protest, they may be unwilling to come to a negotiating table or to use mediation. In that situation, rights or power procedures should be first employed to bring a recalcitrant party to the negotiating table by increasing cost of not reconciling interest. Also, when a dispute is about interpretations of constitutionally guaranteed rights, such a dispute can be most appropriately handled by the court rather than negotiations. Some conflicts come from deep value differences. For example, an interest-based negotiation is not appropriate to address conflict between pro-choice and pro-life groups because they cannot compromise or trade off their cherished values and identities. Finally, there are cases where a right contest or a power contest is preferable from a social perspective in resolving a question of public importance, such as racism and democratization to resolution through interest-based negotiation. Despite the values of right-based approaches and power-based approaches, the problem is that people often use such procedures when they are not necessary. In other words, people tend to focus on right or power when they can start focusing on interest and avoid unnecessary right or power contest. Right and power-based approach should be a last resort rather than a first approach to resolve a dispute. Now, let's review what we have learned in this module on challenging conventional wisdom in dispute resolution. Many people believe they can get what they want or resolve a dispute by determining who is right or who is more powerful. However, right-based or power-based approaches are more costly and less beneficial than interest-based approaches. Therefore, we can say that interest-based approaches are more effective in resolving a dispute than right-based or power-based approaches. However, we need to understand also when and where right-based or power-based approaches are necessary and beneficial.